What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our weekly show where we go over the magic stories as they are posted on Wizard's website. This week, we have Favor by Michael Yi Chow. My quick review in the beginning is, this one was a pretty short one, at least it felt pretty short, and yet it answered a lot of questions. Some people are going to say when they read this story that they knew that this was coming, and that's fine, but it still answers a lot of questions. It still definitively does that for us. And so for that reason, if you've been following along at home, I definitely recommend this one. That's my quick review. I don't know if you agree, disagree.
I would say definitely read it, but it's not my favorite story. It's the climax. But I feel like for the climax, it should be more climactic.
Well, and I'm sure we'll see it more in weeks to come, but I absolutely know what you're saying.
We might see that develop a little bit.
Correct. But this was,
I think this was a short story, and it definitely needs to be read if you're reading in sequence the stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't just skip it and think it'll be fine.
No. Definitely not. So that's our quick review in the beginning. Go read that first, then come back here. First of all, if you don't read it or you don't go to the article on the website and look at it, you're going to miss some sweet art as well.
Yes.
I mean, if you've been following along, sure, you'll see, you'll know the art from the preview cards and stuff, but this is blown up and they look amazing. It's totally worth your time, even if it's just for that alone. So yeah, that's our quick review. We always say that we review, we don't summarize, so you should go read the story first.
Yeah.
On to the full review itself. I agree with you that this was not as... I didn't walk away from this one as hyped or as like jazzed as I did from the other ones with how amazing it was. That in no way means that I think it was bad, but it was not the kind of story where I walked away and I was like, that was amazing. Oh my God, it was so cool. There was this and this and this, and I can't believe I think this story did exactly what it needed to do, but it did not, it wasn't super flashy about it, if that makes sense. This story had Samut, it had Jeru, it had Hazaret, which is whose perspective this story was told from. It had Bantu, and it had Nicobolus. Because we finally got to see him. And that's the thing that surprised me, is that there wasn't more to that. Nicobolus finally showed up. It's what everyone had been waiting for, and by everyone, I don't even just mean the citizens on Amonkhet, being like, oh, our God Pharaoh's back. I mean people reading the stories. Right. Like, this is what people have been waiting for. Nicobolus is back. And while his return was told from Hazaret's perspective, so it gave you the impact of, oh, thank God he's back. I can't wait for him to, why is he killing everyone? It's that kind of transition of, oh, Ronus was right. Oh, Samut was right, and then compounded with the other reveal of Bantu, and we can get to that in a minute. But I don't know. I guess I thought that there would be more, but again, I also would think that it would be told from... I hope that moment is told from multiple perspectives over the next week's story, the week after, or whatever.
I don't know how many perspectives we really have left.
Well,
most of the people are dead.
True, but most
of the citizens are dead, and most of the gods are dead. So we're down to the Gatewatch, Samut, and Jeru.
Yes, and that's exactly who I want to hear from. I want to hear but I want to hear what Samut and Jeru feel about the God Pharaoh's return. I want to see what the Gatewatch, feel like with Nicobolus showing up, and. Right. I think Samut and Jeru even more so than the Gatewatch, which, again, is a very good thing because these are new characters from this plane that we are supposed to be meant to care about, and I care more about their response to Nicobolus showing up than the people who showed up solely to fight Nicobolus.
Right.
So, yeah, that's definitely how I feel. I want to know what they think and what that means for them, and does Jeru even need to be further convinced of the fact that, Nicol Bolas is in fact bad? Because Hazaret needed to be convinced even further, because even though all of the hours that had happened previously were kind of bastardized in terms of her understanding of what they would have been, she still was like, well, the God Pharaoh will show up and fix everything.
Right.
And even Amy, when we were reading it today, Amy was sitting there being like, yeah, okay. Sure he is. You keep thinking that, lady. So, yeah, that...
Yeah, it was getting old quick.
Exactly. And which is why then I think it was good that he did show up and she was able to kind of realize it. Now, the thing that I like is we saw when Ronus died that Ronus had the image in his head right before he actually died of the realization of, his memories coming back to him and the realization of Nicol Bolas being evil and not truly the God Pharaoh. In this one, and we didn't quite get to see if the same thing happened with Kefnet and with Oketra, because we weren't being told the story from their perspective at that moment, and they didn't have the Ronus moment of, yelling out, the God Pharaoh's a deceiver, it's all a lie, like I said, like Ronus did. So, but we get to see Hazaret have that experience and not immediately die afterwards.
Right.
Which means that now Hazaret, who is not by any means at full strength, but is still alive, unlike... spoilers, I guess. I mean, again, you should have read it already, but unlike spoilers, the other now 4 gods, because Bantu dies here, Hazaret's the only one left. And it even says that at the end, that, the last pillar of Amonkhet standing, and yet she now also has all of her memories back.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of.
She said that when Bantu used her blast against Hazaret, the mental blocks were shattered and knocked away, because of course Bantu was attempting to kill Hazaret and thought she was going to in the first place.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I guess we can assume from that all of the magic that was blocking her memories actually is gone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can only come to that conclusion truly because of the mechanics of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if that happened in real life, I mean, obviously that's a little far-fetched, but I think if that happened in real life, we wouldn't be able to assume that all of our memories were back. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, as opposed to a couple have been
right, okay,
shaken loose.
I understand things better now versus, okay, there was a spell blocking my memories very specifically, and now that spell is completely gone, and all of my memories are intact and back and accessible to me. I feel like I feel like for the purposes of this, we can assume that that is what happened, but I think if that were to happen in a more realistic setting, we wouldn't necessarily be able to make that assumption.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I think, I also found it interesting, before I forget, I think it's cool that we have had multiple stories, and again, this goes back to, if you've been following along with our show, we talked about this last week, and I think the week before as well, but the fact that there are people who do not want to hear as much from the Gatewatch, and I'm pretty sure it's been like weeks, maybe even over a month, since we have heard a story from the perspective of one of the Gatewatch.
Yeah.
Because we had Hapatra, we've had Samut, we have these other characters, Ronus as well, telling their stories from their perspective, and it's, I think, a very welcome change. I am not, I have said this from the start as well, I am not one of those people who's like, get rid of the Gatewatch, they suck, I'm tired of hearing stories about them.
Yeah.
But I'm also enjoying the way that they're doing it now, where they are giving you those characters and making it more in depth, and you understand them better and hear from them more and care about them.
Right. And I definitely agree with that, because I feel like when it was all about the Gatewatch all day, every day, I was enjoying it quite a bit and saying, wow, this is really great. I love the fact that there are these main characters, and these are the characters that we really have to focus on and make sure that we care about, and we're going to care about them so deeply for that. And that was the case. And then as that shift started to occur, I realized that I like this new way just as much, if not better, because it's making me care about the supporting characters a lot more. And if you've watched our other episodes of JaAR, you know how much I enjoyed the Gatewatch-centric way of telling these stories, and you also saw the sort of change in me when you saw the sort of change in the story format. I definitely like the fact that the supporting characters are more meaningful now.
Well, because, if I may, because look at your favorite characters from past sets, besides Nissa, because, you know, she's just up there, but Nahiri, Yeheni, Drana. You know, these are people whose stories we have heard, but they may have been a one-off. It was a one-time thing where you know, we only heard Drana's story once, although she existed in other, you know, stories, but, you know, maybe had a line or two and we didn't get too much from her.
I think there were maybe 2 stories that really made me love Drana.
Right. But, you know, and Yeheni had a couple as well.
And quite a few for Nahiri, I feel.
Yeah, well, Nahiri is a planeswalker, and that was kind of a main point of the story, unlike Arlen Cord, cough, cough. But, you know, it still was something where they are the supporting characters. And sure, you enjoy Nissa and, I mean, the Gatewatch in general, as you just said, but at the same time, hearing from those supporting characters and having variance is still very important, because telling the story from the same 5 perspectives will get old after a while.
Yeah.
And I like I said, I don't think that I was there yet, but other people were, and I respect those opinions. I don't, you know, I am hoping that they're not fully, you know, gone with Gatewatch perspective stories, and I'm relatively certain they're not.
Right.
Because that's kind of the journey that they're on at this point. But at the same time, I can understand where others are coming from, and as the Magic Story team, you want to be able to cater to your entire audience's wants, needs, desires, etc. And this is a great way of doing it, because for those of us who do enjoy the Gatewatch stories, I don't think this takes away from it in any way, where people are going to be like, but what does Liliana think? It's fine. We will see her soon enough, and we will get that perspective soon enough. But right now they're focusing on other people and their stories.
And that definitely helps validate the cards as well.
Right.
Because when you have a Samut card, or a Jeru card, or a, you know, Hazaret card, they're a lot more meaningful when we know something about those characters.
Correct.
And there's much less of a need to have 8 standard legal Nissas.
6, I believe.
Whatever.
Regardless. Too many.
Too many.
Is the answer.
I love Nissa, but that's too many.
It's way too many. It's many, many too many. But yeah, and for Vorthoses, I think it's Vorthoses.
Vorthai.
Yeah, Vorthai is definitely not what it is. For us Vorthoses, it really does. It's important. That's what we look for. Is like, oh wow, Samut, sweet. And hey, don't get me wrong. And you can look at some of the drafts on this channel where I had Samut in Amonkhet. There is a reason why that, like, people like that card in particular, and it's not just because she was prominent in the story. Although she was prominent in the story, and that was pretty sweet.
It's probably mostly not because she was prominent in the story.
That card's real good. And her Planeswalker card is not as good. But I have not gotten to play with it yet because it is not yet Hour of Devastation release, but still, or pre-release. But regardless, that should be very interesting to see how that relates and how these characters come about. We get to actually get a Jeru card. We had 2 Samut cards, but now we get our first Jeru card, because Jeru's Resolve does not count. That card was a random instant or sorcery that, whatever. Back to the review itself.
Oh yeah, that's what we were doing.
Sometimes we forget. I did want to point out, obviously we said we'd talk about it later, Bantu's betrayal. It was assumed by a lot of people, and I believe we discussed it on this channel as well, in the comments as well as in the videos themselves, of the fact that Bantu's God card was different than all the others. Bantu herself, she did not have a golden face. It was still an animal face because it was an alligator, but it wasn't golden like the rest. It was not, she was kneeling in her art, whereas the others were standing.
Looking up.
Correct. With, and so it showed the difference, and people did pick up on that. And I was always like, well, we don't know, but it seems like
those
there's...
are definitely arguments that could be made.
Correct.
But now we know that they were arguments because they were correct.
And I think it went even deeper than at least the theories that I saw, which is that Bantu knew all along that Nicol Bolas was Nicol Bolas and not truly the God Pharaoh, but I guess was someone to Bantu that Bantu knew was infinitely stronger than she was, and that someone that she needed to kind of worship and respect, because otherwise she could have just been killed by him. Ipso facto, the end of this story, because Nicol Bolas just did that to her. And, even to a point where Bantu tried to do the same thing to Hazaret and failed, came really, really close, but failed. And Nicol Bolas was able to do it, pretty handily to Bantu. So, but we got to see Bantu betray Hazaret, reveal herself to not only have been aware of this the whole time, but to have also been basically a servant hiding behind the scenes. She said that she kept the threads on the ley lines taught for Nicol Bolas, basically. The ley lines that he had weaved or woven, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like from this point on, we're not going to talk more about Bantu. But
I agree.
I kind of wish that we would. I kind of wish that there was more of a full story about Bantu, and kind of the ways in which she went about everything. Really highlighting the differences between her and the other gods, and kind of just how she went through life almost.
Right.
Knowing that the life everybody else was living was a lie.
Right.
I think that would be a truly interesting story. And
yeah.
I'm sad to know, because I'm pretty certain that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I'll agree. Especially because there's a lot left to do with these stories. First of all, we still have 2 more story spotlights / hour cards. Hour with an H. So we still have 2 more of those.
Well, we hope they'll be ours eventually.
That's true, and we'll talk about that at the end. But yeah, there are 2 more story spotlights to go. Plus, technically, I'm sure it will all be in one story, but we have the entirety of the Gatewatch's defeat. The Jace's defeat, Gideon's defeat, Nissa's defeat, etc. Chandra and Liliana. And we have Samut still. Samut's still not a planeswalker. At least
and Jeru,
Well, Jeru, we don't know what happens to Jeru. He's not a planeswalker.
We pretty much assume that Jeru's going to die or something really bad's going to happen to Jeru.
Correct. We assume that. And
which is a whole nother arc that has to be explored.
And yet Hazaret's still around as well. So what happens there?
Right.
Bolas doesn't die. I mean, you know that Bolus isn't
Yeah.
dying on Amonkhet. You know, this is not... Hour of Devastation is not Bolus's last hurrah.
Yeah.
But will he, you know, leave injured in any way, or will he strut out successfully? Will his plan with Tezzeret come to fruition? Will we learn about that plan at all? Or will it be kept perfectly vague, and then we go to Ixalan having no idea what the hell's going on?
Right. I was hoping at the end of I'm blanking now.
Ether Revolt?
Yeah, I was really hoping that at the end of Ether Revolt, that there'd be some kind of a clue that maybe a Johnny would be back to kind of bail them all out of the mess that they had gotten themselves into.
You know, it's funny. There are a lot of people who think that that's what's happening, or that that's what's going to happen.
I used to think that that would happen, but now I can't still think that.
No,
because
I also don't
there's
think that.
simply no time to fit that in at the end. There's just so much more to do. I can't see how that's conceivable anymore.
Yeah, and not only that, but I don't think it's necessary. I mean, obviously we don't know how the Gatewatch gets out of here, although my guess is it has something to do with Samut sparking, but we don't know that, and we don't know how that's going to work out. Obviously Hazaret's there as well, and you have people like Hapatra who are fighting against Nicol Bolas and kind of realizing that this is not a good guy, not a guy dragon, but still.
I'm kind of hoping that we find that Nicol Bolas sort of, I don't know. Again, I'm gonna reference Ether Revolt and Kaladesh and sit here and say I think it'd be really cool if the Gatewatch all ended up leaving through the Planar Bridge.
I do.
But that's not gonna happen either.
No,
so,
and in fact,
but these are all things that I wanted to happen before we started reading these stories. And they're all things that now at this point I'm pretty certain aren't going to happen by the end.
in fact, I don't understand exactly how it fully works with, I'm not, now speaking of not remembering names.
And I was thinking Planar Bridge, like I had the name in my head, and then the moment when I was about to mention it, I forgot it, and I had to have you say it, so.
Speaking of which, I got it. I don't know how it worked with Rashmi going through the Planar Bridge. I couldn't remember Rashmi's name, sorry. But I don't know how it worked with her either going through it or at least seeing into it, but it seems like from the Amonkhet art book that was recently released, it seems like the Planar Bridge can only have unliving things go through it. Or non-living things go through it. So like I said, I don't know whether Rashmi was actually in there or whether she was just looking through it and saw.
I think she maybe kind of entered.
Well,
she
was also in like
through into another plane.
Right.
Is something different.
She was also, I think, in the inner workings at the time. Like she was like in the mechanics of it or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't fully understand, but I think that's on purpose. So. We shall see. I mean, at this point, it really does look like Nicol Bolas is creating a Lazotep army, and he's going to send them through to fight things, or go to other planes and take over, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
The last thing that I wanted to talk about for this story in particular was, we've talked about it in the weeks past, that there were two stories, both with Ronus and with Hapatra. I always mix up Hazaret and Hapatra. With Ronus and with Hapatra, there were distinct points in both stories where they took a moment out to say, and he wept for Ronus, and she wept for Hapatra. Those were their own separate lines, they were their own separate paragraphs, and they were meant to be that impactful. That those two characters, again, we discussed it at the time, you can go back and watch the episode, click on the playlist at the end, but Ronus being a man and thinking that, a male, I should say, and, he is the god of strength, and stereotypically, whether it is accurate or not to believe this, stereotypically strong men don't cry, and that's wrong, and again, like I said, we talk about that more in depth in that other episode, so before you get upset with me in the comments, go watch that other episode. I explain that a lot better. That's not the point here. Between those two characters weeping and us being told about that so prominently, as I say frequently, it was not lost on me that in this story, the thing that was given its own paragraph was referencing Nicol Bolas, and it said, and he smiled. He looked around at the death and the destruction all around him, and Hazaret was waiting for him to make the decision and save them, and then she noticed that he smiled.
Okay.
And that was told to us in its own paragraph.
Okay.
It's just those 3 words, and he smiled. And that as a contrast to those other 2 stories that specifically said, and he wept, and she wept, and he smiled. It was a very interesting shift.
That's very cool that you mentioned that, because I'll say that while you were reading it and I wasn't looking at it, my interpretation of that was different. And
Okay.
here's why, because you said that and I was like, well, of course. But seeing it and being able to compare that visual to the memory in my head of the other 2 being written in that same visual, that's a lot more impactful than the way I took it while I was sitting there.
Right. And I'm sure that leads to a whole argument that could be made about reading the story versus listening to the story. We are not unaware of the fact that there are ways that you can listen to the magic story out there. Are they the best? No. But they are things that people do. And at least one of them, Wizards is behind. And I don't know that makes sense, because it is a written medium for a reason. You are meant to read it. And the other thing is, when these things are in solely audio form or YouTube video form or whatever you want to call it, you don't get the art as an impact as well. And that's important, at least in my opinion. And you may disagree, and you're welcome to let us know if you do in the comments down below. But it's a written medium. It's a written medium for a reason. And sure, you can get the same information through an audio version, but not in the same way. And what we were just talking about, is just an example of why.
I think, I don't know, I think hearing it, I think everything has pros and cons, and I think hearing it is great. What I would say would be the better way to do that would be to have the video, have audio of someone reading it while having video of the actual story scrolling. So you see the words as they're written.
Okay.
You see the pictures as they're placed. Where they're placed.
I like that.
As they look, but you're also hearing someone read it.
I like
I think that experience could be way more immersive than one or the other.
Yeah, no, I do. I like that a lot. That's honestly something that, in that particular way, I hadn't thought of. I thought of having an audio version, and then where in the story that a picture would pop up, a picture pops up, and then the next time another picture would pop up, that one pops up to replace it, and you go from there. But I like yours a lot better.
I think it makes sense to scroll through. I mean, if someone's reading it to you, you don't necessarily need to follow along super closely.
Correct.
So it's okay if it's going as fast as the person is reading or whatever, and you're a little slower at reading or whatever the case may be. But, to be able to see that written paragraph that way, I think would have made it a lot more impactful for me in that moment.
Correct. And that was my point in mentioning it. That's an example of why it is meant to be absorbed in the way that it is created. You know what I mean? And not in secondary or tertiary creations based off of that. That, again, personal opinion, and I welcome disagreement or discussion in the comments as always. I think that's it for me for this one. Like I said, it was a shorter one. I didn't have too much more to talk about it because we have to... This story, I think, will become more important as the weeks to come stories come out, because we'll get to see how they relate and what this story did for us in getting us to that point. Okay. But in and of itself, that was about all I had for this one. I don't know if you had any more.
Sure. I'd like to ask people if they know anything about Bantu as an alligator specifically.
I believe it was alligator versus crocodile. Yes.
Okay. If anybody knows anything about alligators in Egyptian mythology, or the alligator god, if there was an alligator god,
right.
I'd like to know that information down in the comments. I'll probably do a little bit of research, but I know I'm not going to have a ton of time before this next episode of JAR. And probably this next story is really the only one that will maybe even sort of reference Bantu again.
Probably, yeah. If at all, yes.
So,
yeah.
That's probably the only one that will make sense at all for me to discuss it even a little bit still. But I'd really like to know what information you can provide on that. Just to kind of give more of a frame of reference of why Bantu specifically would have done that. Maybe why her face would have not been gold, whereas the others would have been. Maybe the alligator god in Egyptian mythology, did something very similar, was very much that way in sort of betraying, one of the other gods and sort of, fell out of favor or something like that. Anything that sounds like it might be being referenced by these aspects that we talked about, I would really appreciate having that information. And I like I said, I will look it up a little bit, but I'd rather not spend too much time on that, because again, I'm sure the stories aren't going to reference it anymore.
Right.
I could look into that, until the end of time and have a great time doing it. But I know that it's not something we need to dwell on. But if anybody knows that information offhand, or if they just want to do a little bit of quick research for me so we can kind of discuss it in the comments a little bit of this video, that would be fantastic. And maybe I'll, talk about it slightly in the next one. But
especially if it comes up, then obviously, it'll be something to talk about. That's it for this story. I think, just so that you guys all know, for stuff for the channel, they'll be popping up soon. We have playlists. We have the subscribe button, which will pop up around here. You guys should definitely click that, subscribe. You'll find out when more of these videos come out. Plus, one of our most popular series, if you can call it that, or recurring types of videos, pre-releases this weekend.
Yes.
We open pre-release kits and we get them out to you early. Yes. And by that I mean late. We get our kits at midnight and we open them up for all of you. You should definitely go and watch that.
And we get those videos up quickly.
Yeah, we are up real late. Possible. Oh yeah.
Yes, so we stay up. He stays up. Well, we both stay up.
We stay up. It's fine.
But he's the one on the computer,
So
making sure that those videos get out to you.
And I love doing it. I'm more than happy to. That is in no way a complaint from me. You can check those videos out. If you subscribe, you'll find out as soon as they come out. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I haven't said this in a long time, but the links to our Facebook and Twitter are always in the description. Yes. And I always put our videos out on those areas as well, just in case there's any YouTube mumbo jumbo with subscription boxes. And
if you're writing stuff to us on Twitter or in the comments or whatever, wherever, we do see it. So
agreed.
If you want to talk to us, that's how.
Yes. So you can check those things out. We have draft videos, Amonkhet openings. Obviously, we will have Hour of Devastation openings. There's a ton of different things. There's obviously more of this series as well if you are new here. Thank you all so much for watching and staying up to this point in the video. Yes. This has been another episode of JAR on Geek for All. I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.